Ela é sobrinha de uma das principais personagens de um dos mais famosos casos de abdução extraterrestre em toda a história. Ela vai contar detalhes deste caso que em 2021 fez 60 anos. Vem comigo que eu te conto tudo e você vai saber tudo mais nessa entrevista inédita e exclusiva. Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, boa madrugada, aonde você estiver. Eu sou o Thiago Luiz Chiquete. Sejam bem-vindos ao canal Desvendando Mistérios. Olá pessoal, e a nossa entrevistada de hoje, uma gravação, mas é inédita e exclusiva que você só encontra aqui nesse canal, Kathleen Marden, simplesmente a sobrinha de Barney Hill, de Barney Hill, da Abdução dos Hills, um dos mais incríveis e impressionantes casos de abdução extraterrestre já ocorridos. Nessa entrevista ela vai trazer detalhes sobre esse caso, análise do vestido de Betty, vai trazer o trabalho que ela fez com Stanton Friedman para escrever este livro aqui, que foi publicado, a segunda edição, em comemoração aos 60 anos do caso. Você vai saber tudo o que aconteceu nesse caso e mais, a pesquisa que a Kathleen faz com pessoas que se dizem abduzidas. O trabalho dela é muito legal. Vamos então para mais uma entrevista aqui no canal Desvendando Mistérios. E já que você gosta desses assuntos, não se esqueça de se inscrever no canal. Marque também o sininho para sempre que tiver um vídeo novo você ser avisado. Deixe também um like em todos os mais de 400 vídeos do canal. E por fim, deixe seu comentário. Comente todos os vídeos. Eu quero saber a sua opinião. Vamos então para essa entrevista inédita e exclusiva aqui com Kathleen Marden no canal Desvendando Mistérios.
Well, Kathleen, thank you very much for being here in my channel. The Brazilian audience gonna love it because they know you a lot. And they know your work, and they know a lot and want to know more about the Beth and Barney Hill abduction and your work, of course, because it's not only about this abduction. You have a great work in the ufology field. So I will start with the same question that I start with all my guests. What led you to the ufology?
Well, I had no interest in ufology until September 20th, 1961. And that is when I returned home from school and my mother was on the phone with my aunt, Betty Hill. And then my mother told me that she was concerned because a flying saucer had come so close to my aunt and uncle the previous evening that they feared they'd been contaminated. She told me a little bit about the story and the concerns, and within a couple of days we were at Betty's and Barney's home, where I heard about it myself and saw some of the perplexing evidence. And I think that sort of got me started, but my interest became astronomy. And I thought that, oh, well, maybe I'll study astronomy in college and become an astronomer, but that's not what I did. I chose a different field of study. But over the years, I met various highly prominent researchers, such as Alan Hynek, Dr. Alan Hynek, Dr. Benjamin Simon, Jacques Vallée, Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, Dr. James Harder, and many, many more researchers, including Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist, now deceased. They're all now deceased. But I saw them in action. They were visiting my aunt and uncle, and sometimes, other times I met them elsewhere at conferences. For example, I met Alan Hynek at Dr. Benjamin Simon's house when I accompanied Betty and Barney there to have dinner when I was 18 or 19 years old. So I continued to have this interest. And I had my own sightings with family members over time. And it wasn't until 1990 or so, maybe 1988, I don't remember specifically, but I became very ill and I had to leave my profession. It was an illness that I was sort of doomed to have for the rest of my life. It was debilitating. And I decided, since I had had all of this intellectual stimulation, writing, etc., during my professional career, that I, as time permitted, as my health permitted, would investigate my aunt and uncle's experience. I knew many other experiencers of ET contact at that point in time through my visits with my Aunt Betty and through friends of hers who were also abductees, as we called them in those days. So I began that process, and I was so fascinated by my findings and that my conversations with my Aunt Betty, my research trips with my husband and with Betty and others, that I just continued to look for answers. I knew that the US government was deeply involved in all of this, although they denied it, and they programmed the scientific community and the citizens of our country to believe that it was nonsense. But I knew that it was true from the work that I did. And so I wanted to investigate the history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, their major studies, their decision to cover up their findings of their studies, why they covered this up, and those who were actively involved in the cover-up, their modus operandi, and what they did to every major evidence case throughout U.S. history. Ended up writing a book with Stanton Friedman about that. So I wrote 3 books with nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, and was very pleased to do that. I've written 2 additional books since then. I am an experiencer advocate. I set up for the Mutual UFO Network a program where experiencers could contact MUFON, complete a 30-question questionnaire, and speak with a non-judgmental member of the experiencer resource team. It was experiencer research team when I was the director. I'm no longer the director. I've stepped down due to new directions that my research is taking me in. But over the 10 years that I had that position, my team grew from 3 people to more than 50 people. So I thought that was a major accomplishment. I've also worked on 3 studies, 2 of them with PhD scientists on experiencers and the commonalities that experiencers share. So I'm just a very curious person, like my Aunt Betty was. I want the answers. I don't want to go through life with a lot of questions in my mind.
And I think you have the same thought that I have, because I want answers as well. Well, the abduction of your auntie Barney and Betty, this conversation was normal inside your family. Is something like in a Sunday lunch, Sunday dinner. Well, what happened, auntie? Is that true? Is it normal to you and your family speak about it?
Well, it was not normal. We didn't speak of it before September 20th, 1961. But as we watched this unfolding, we saw Betty's curiosity. We saw Barney's trepidation. We saw Barney's health declining, his not wanting to talk about this. Betty wanted to talk all the time when we gathered together as a family on the weekends. We would sit around and she would tell us what she'd learned, but Barney wouldn't be there. He would be walking on the backlands of the family farm. He did not want to address this. And I believe that this is the reason that he developed bleeding ulcers and high blood pressure and was hospitalized with this life-threatening condition. And this is what led them ultimately to be referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon. And Dr. Simon was a renowned psychiatrist who had earned his reputation as a colonel in the Army during World War II, when he set up the neuropsychiatric unit at the Mason General Hospital on Long Island, and very successfully treated people who are returning from the war, terribly damaged, with conditions that were psychogenically induced as a result of the horrible trauma they suffered. And Dr. Simon was able to get beyond the immediate cause of that trauma into the number of things in that individual's lifetime that contributed to the emotional condition that they were suffering from. He didn't believe that UFOs were real. He, I think, was probably motivated in this belief by his association with the military and also his professional image. He was in Who's Who in America. He had owned his own private psychiatric hospital. He was associated with Harvard University and Yale. And so he had a reputation to protect as well. But he used that hypnosis process that he had developed on Barney to help Barney to overcome, to live through and work out emotionally before he overcame this trauma, to accept the source of it. And for Betty, who wasn't the primary patient, but who was simply curious, Betty underwent hypnosis too. So Dr. Simon saw Betty and Barney individually for a period of 6 months in 1964. And they had separate hypnosis. He reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, so they couldn't share this information with one another or with anyone else. Toward the end of this, Dr. Simon brought them together. Their hypnosis sessions had ended, and they listened to what the other one said on their hypnosis tapes, and then discussed it and worked through it with Dr. Simon, who was treating his patients regardless of his personal belief system.
And well, the case, the events turned 60 years in 2021, right?
Yes.
16 years anniversary. And well, I have 2 or 3 of her books. I just could found 2 because one is missing in my library, so I have to find. But I have this one captured.
Yes, and I've just updated that with new information, new scientific evidence in the 60th anniversary edition that was released recently.
I just ordered this new edition on Amazon. So tell us, what, just a glimpse, of course, not just a little bit. Tell us what news that you discovered about this case 16 years after it.
Well, I can't tell you everything that I wrote in the book because then no one would need to purchase the book to find out. But I can tell you that we have found witnesses who to the incident that night, to the UFO. and many witnesses. We also found very interesting evidence on Betty's dress that had not been discovered before. There's been an update on the star map that she sketched at the direction of Dr. Benjamin Simon. If she could remember this star map accurately, and if it didn't trouble her too much. The star map was shown to her when she was on the craft, when she overcame her fear of this leader and said to him, I know you're not from around here, where's your home port? And so he produced a 3-dimensional star map. There were two larger stars in the foreground, connected by 5 lines. There were 10 other stars connected by lines, some dotted lines, some solid lines. And then there were some other stars that were not connected by lines. And that star map was later investigated by a brilliant woman from Ohio who, after many years and after we had actually advanced in our technology and had new distance data and new stars that were now within 54 light years of our sun, she was able to identify the stars, the pattern stars on Betty's map, which was very interesting. But there's an update on that too. There are many other updates that I have put into the book.
Oh, it's an amazing book because updated would be much more better. Betty, on board the UFO, she saw a drawing, and that years after, we discovered this would be Alpha Centauri constellation, isn't it?
Zeta Reticuli is
Zeta Reticuli, yeah.
Two large stars in the foreground connected by 5 lines.
Yeah. Do you think, because many people ask to me, that this is where the aliens came from, or probably where they want to go, or just a picture in a wall? What's your feeling about it?
Well, what Betty understood about this is that the home planet, the home stars of that held the planets for this group of extraterrestrials was being shown to her. But then the leader said to her, do you know where you are on this map? And she said, no, I don't know much about the universe. And he said, well, if you don't know where you are, how can I tell you where I am? And so it was like, there's no reference point. And so this map, he made this map disappear at that point. So many unanswered questions. But when Marjorie Fish finally did find a match, after she had built 14 models over a period of years. And I want to tell you and everyone listening how hard her work was, how difficult it was in that time frame, because there were no computers. There were not even photocopy machines. So she had to go to the university and sit with these astronomical catalogs and hand copy all of the characteristics of the stars out 54 light years from our sun in all directions. And then not just distance data, but the colors, the sequence, all of those things. And then she would take that information home. She used a 3-dimensional frame and monofilament line and beads, and had to do the math to know precisely where to place each one of those stars in its proper location in that portion of our galaxy. And and as I said, in 1972, a few years after she began this search, she still did not have a match. But then we advanced technologically. She had different distance data. There was some stars that she had that we now knew were within 54 light years. We didn't know that before. And she went home and she constructed the map with the new distance data, and she found a match. And then the difficult thing about that was who was going to vet her work for accuracy. And this is when Stanton Friedman was called in. And Cora Lorenzen from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization asked Stanton to meet with Marjorie. And if he found that she was credible, would he please find scientists who would vet Marjorie's work for accuracy? And so Stanton met with Marjorie, and he told me that she was brilliant, that she was far more comfortable speaking with scientists than with the general public. And in fact, she was a school teacher at that time, but after she did this work, she was hired by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the nuclear laboratory, to work as an assistant researcher, or a research assistant, I should say, right along with the PhD scientists. And so that was very satisfying for Marjorie. Stanton then did find Dr. Alan Hynek, astrophysicist at Northwestern University. And he looked at, analyzed the star map identification that Marjorie did. Stanton and Marjorie took a model to him, and he said that it was accurate. And then Dr. David Saunders, statistician, looked at all of this and assessed it for accuracy, and also did a statistical analysis. And then a professor from Ohio State University had his students. At this point, that we had computers, and he had his students do a computer-generated model, which was much easier than the work that Marjorie did for all of those years, and discovered that, yes, it was accurate. Well, what else that the scientists discovered about these stars on Betty's map is not only were they in this constellation of stars in our galaxy, but they all had special properties. All the stars on Betty's map are sun-like, although only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood, out 54 light years in all directions, are sun-like. And all of the stars, the sun-like stars, in that volume of space where shows Betty's map, all of those sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map. None of them are missed. They're all there, which is quite extraordinary. In addition to that, all of the stars are arranged in a plane. One of the scientists, the astrophysicist who analyzed this, stated that if we lived on a planet orbiting around Zeta Reticuli, and we were going to explore space, this is precisely the route that we would take. It makes sense logically, going from star to star, because those stars are in this plane like pepperoni on a pizza, Stanton would say, as opposed to raisins spread out in a thick loaf of raisin bread. So it's simply extraordinary.
One thing that that's in the book that impressed me was about the discovery of letters that want to destroy Betty's image. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, there was a disinformant in the United States. His name was Philip Klass. He was probably the most prolific anti-UFO disinformant in the United States during the 20th century. He had no interest in UFOs early on in his career. He had been an electrical engineer, and then he was hired to write for a magazine in Washington, D.C. On aviation and space technology, and then became one of the editors. But he got into trouble with the federal government. Twice he had published classified information, and the government couldn't prosecute him because they would have to release that classified information. They didn't want to release it. Also, he was under suspicion of having a relationship with a man who worked at the Soviet embassy. And this was a time during the Cold War, and Philip Klass's relationship, ongoing close relationship with this man, bothered the government. They thought that Klass might be a Soviet agent. And so, especially because he took so-called business and pleasure trips to Europe and to Eastern Europe time and time again. And so he was being followed by the FBI. His apartment was broken into, and suddenly Philip Klass became a disinformant. He read his first book he wrote in one of the books that he wrote. He read his first book on the topic in 1966, the summer of 1966. And then the first book was The Incident at Exeter, about police officers and a young man and several others who observed a UFO in the skies, and also in Rockingham County, New Hampshire, incidentally in the time frame when Betty was trying to call in craft so that these scientists could observe them. The scientists wanted to collect a piece of hardware from the craft or the entities. But getting back to what I was saying, Philip Klass, his second book was about Betty and Barney. His first investigation, he wasn't a trained investigator, but his first investigation was on Lonnie Zamora, who observed a landed craft and small entities in New Mexico on an arroyo. And so all of this was part of Philip Klass's sudden interest. And I've done a tremendous amount of research. I wanted to know what caused this man to do what he was doing. His archival collection is at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. I made numerous trips there in my research. I found out why he wanted to destroy Betty and Barney's story. I learned about his other work, and I have his FBI file as well. And I strongly believe, as did Stanton, that Klass was threatened by the government. Either he worked on their disinformation program, or he would be prosecuted and for other things. And so he made that decision, I suspect. And one of his first jobs was to destroy Betty and Barney. And he began this in 1967 and continued with this until his death. He had a young protege who was also a spy, and in one of his letters he called him a spy, who was attempting to destroy Allen Hynek, Dr. Allen Hynek. He also attempted to destroy Dr. James McDonald, probably the greatest scientist ever to have lived in the United States, who scientifically studied UFOs. He did destroy him. He ended up committing suicide after he lost his reputation and funding because of the actions of Philip Klass. I can tell you that Philip Klass was prolific at reporting people to the U.S. Tax Bureau and causing doubt about their honesty. I know of other cases where this happened. I know that Betty's tax documents that she had prepared were removed from her house and then were returned scattered throughout her, in a trail throughout her house. And then she was audited by the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. And I lived with Betty when I was in college after Barney's death. I drove Barney's car to the university. And the reason I moved in is because Betty and Barney were helping me through college, paying for my room and board. And with Barney's death, Betty had to make other arrangements. And not only that, but I was there. There was an intercom between our apartments, and so I was listening in because Betty's house was being entered and weird things were being done. And I observed, I heard, I know what happened because I heard what I thought was Betty enter her house. And she, I guess, turned around and went back out. That was what I thought when I went up the stairs to look for her to say hello. And I thought, oh, she just stopped in for a minute to pick something up and she's gone again. Well, I went back down to my apartment and sat down to study again. And I heard crash, bang, loud footsteps. And I went running up the stairs. And there was a closet door that now stood open. It had been closed. There was a baseball bat that Betty had just recreationally. And now it was lying on the floor. One of those bangs was where this individual was holding that baseball bat to hit me over the head if I opened the closet door. And he dropped it on the floor. The front door to her apartment was wide open. The front door down at the end of the hallway that went to the outside was open. The front gate was open, and a man in a brown suit was running up the street. That was no common burglar. She was part of an intelligence operation to discredit her. And Philip Klass, whom I mentioned, took every single part of that story of what happened to Betty and Barney and what is documented in the early files and rewrote it to cast doubt on what happened to them. And not only that, he painted a new picture of Betty and Barney. He painted a picture of Barney as a weak man. Barney was very brave. Barney was a Black man married to a white woman in 1961. He was active in the civil rights movement. He was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights State Advisory Committee. He was active in politics. He was speaking out for the benefit of people in the state and in the country and really around the world. But Philip Klass wanted to destroy that and paint him with a different brush into a weak man who would do or say or think anything that Betty told him to. I know for a fact that's not true. Barney was brave and stable, and his IQ was 140. Betty was a strong woman. We come from a family of strong women. We're intelligent, we're educated, we know our own minds, we have good self-esteem, and we are highly curious. And Philip Klass painted Betty as a UFO kook, a science fiction fan, someone who spent all of her life in these kooky activities. That is absolutely false. But that is what many people came to believe because of this disinformation that was disseminated about my family. And that's part of the reason that I do what I do. I'm a careful researcher. I document everything. I footnote everything that I write. So there's no question about it.
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing and shocking as well, because it shows that they go they go further that they can to to destroy someone image and make them the people looks like a fool. And well, after all these years, researching this case, the Bet and Barney, what's your conclusion? Because many ufologists that study the abduction, they said, well, the abducted was abducted since he was a kid so far, and Betty and Barney were abducted once. Am I correct? So why they were abducted? They have another experiences, and why your final conclusion about this case is it's happened? It's a real abduction by aliens?
Well, first, let me say that our research clearly indicates that 60% of abductees were taken for the first time when they were less than, it's more than 60%, excuse me. It is 78% that were abducted for the first time when they were less than 17 years old. What we've been able to determine is that people were taken initially, probably back in the 1940s, the early 1950s, opportunistically. They might have been children playing on the back lands of the family farm. They might have been in a park. They might have been fishing or camping, or people might have been driving down the road when they were simply picked up and taken to craft. And then this became generational along family lines, intergenerational. So was this Betty's and Barney's first experience? I don't know the answer to that question, but I can tell you that when the Betty's escort was leading her off the craft, he said to her, I know that you were very, very frightened initially, and I apologize for that. We intend no harm. And I think that is true. But Betty said to him, she had overcome her fear. And she said to him, do you think you can come back? If you can come back, I can arrange for you to meet with people who know far more about this than I do. She was thinking of probably scientists and military officers. And he said, I don't know. Maybe I can come back, but it's not my decision to make. And she said, well, how would you find me? Out of all of the people on this planet, how would you find me? And he said to her, we can always find those we're looking for. All this conversation was telepathic. It wasn't in spoken words. And that leads me to believe that, possibly, and the research that I've done, possibly Betty was taken previously, maybe dating back to when she was a child on the family farm. But there's no evidence of that I can use as to back up any hypothesis that I might develop on that. So it has to go unanswered. Maybe she was taken previously, maybe she wasn't. We don't know about Barney either. We know that he, during the summer when he was a child, went to visit his aunt and uncle's farm. And we know that under hypnosis, Barney spoke about a time when he was a child. He was comparing himself to a bunny in a field, and he was with his cousin, and they were out in the field on this farm, and he was saying, and there was this little bunny that we saw, and that little bunny thought that it was safe. It thought that it was hiding. But I went sneaking up on this bunny and I caught it with my hat. And Barney said to Dr. Simon, as he was standing in that field, reliving being in a field in upstate New Hampshire where this craft is hovering only 100 feet above him and he's observing the non-humans looking back at him. Barney was saying, and I'm that bunny. And then, Barney again said, I fear that they're going to catch me like, quote, a bug in a net, close quote. So, maybe they were taken and just didn't remember it previously. This time there was a lot of evidence. There was missing time. It was nothing that could just pass by and not be remembered.
I agree. Well, you are one of the greatest researchers of the UFO phenomenon, mainly about alien abduction. And you wrote several books. And
Yes.
one of them is The Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You Have Been Abducted.
Yes.
Do you think there's a difference between the abduction from the 60s to abduction nowadays? They change the procedure, the method, the way to abduct people.
Yes, the modus operandi has changed over time. Back in the 60s, the focus was, and on into the 70s, 80s, 90s, the focus was on the hybridization program, on medical procedures, on taking tissue samples from experiencers in order to test their bodies for environmental toxicity. This is something that has been a long-term concern to these non-humans. Back then, humans felt like they were victims, that they were being taken and experimented on like lab rats by these non-human entities. So there was a very negative view of all of this. And then over time, this changed. We don't hear much from experiencers anymore about this hybridization program. It appears that perhaps it is coming to an end or has. There are children born to experiencers who have incredible gifts. They are highly intelligent. They are capable of healing others. They are telepathic. They, some of them speak what is called the light language. They are psychic. They are mediums. They are empathic. They're all of these remarkable things and extraordinarily well-rounded as well. So maybe these are the hybrids, but they're only humans who've been tweaked to have an upgrade, because and their parents, all of these experiencers appear, according to our studies, to have been upgraded over time. And I believe, from based upon the research that we've done, that it is because these entities are so concerned about barbaric human behavior. They say that our spirituality is out of sync with our technological progress. And when this occurs and this imbalance exists, they have seen planets destroyed, all life on the planet destroyed. They're also very concerned about our failure to be good stewards to our environment, to the detriment of this planet, to the rewards of a few at the expense of many. And so they want to make changes in that too. They became angry with experiencers because many experiencers did not become vocal advocates of this agenda. But somehow they didn't know that experiencers of contact came out with at least partial amnesia, didn't remember all this. And for years, people like Bud Hopkins tried to figure out what this was all about and why these people were being shown these scenes of destruction on this planet. And, there were many questions. Our research studies of more than 5,000 experiencers have given us a great deal of insight into what all of this means at this point in time. And so that appears to be the agenda. Now people are not being taken to craft as often. There's no need for physical procedures, but they can be taken out of body for communication with these non-humans, and the non-humans who say that they live in the fifth and sixth dimensions can be present in our environment, and but we can't see them. We might be able to feel them through a very strong tingling in our bodies, just like Betty and Barney felt before they were captured back in 1961. Experiencers feel that. Experiences are receiving downloads of information, visions, that sort of thing. So that is the new change in the modus operandi of these non-human entities as their program moves forward.
And we have 3 types of, let's say, abducted. We have the abductee, the contactee, and the experiencer. What's the difference between them?
Okay. I wrote about this because there's been so much infighting among abduction researchers, or that some say that we should call all experiencers of contact abductees. Others say we should call them all contactees. Well, if you remember back in the early 1950s, there were people called contactees, and they were in contact with benevolent space brothers who had come to this planet to assist in our development, and were willing to share their technology, but not with just one country to the detriment of any other. It had to be worldwide. And then there were abductees like Betty and Barney, taken against their will, just picked up off the highway as they're driving along. And John Mack was actually the individual who came up with the term experiencer. And experiencer denotes all abductees and all contactees under one umbrella. So everyone who has had any kind of abduction or contact experience with these non-human entities is an experiencer of contact. There's no value judgment placed.
I understand. Well, is there any main characteristic of which a person was abducted, as brown eyes, blood type. There's some difference between special characters of this abducted or experiencer or something like that.
Yes. Well, our studies indicate that although 15 to 16% of the general population has Rh negative blood, among the those who are in the abductee group, it is 34%, significantly increased, more than double. Among experiencers overall, that includes contactees and abductees, is 31%. So although the majority of experiencers have Rh positive blood types, there is a significantly elevated level of or number of experiencers with Rh negative blood. Also, green eyes or blue eyes is also common. Native Americans, people of Celtic descent, people of Turkish descent are taken at a higher rate than others, other population types as well. Also,
Kathleen, sorry, we don't have much people from the Asian people. We don't have much reports about abduction.
I have talked with the Chinese people. I've done a series of online lectures with for the people of China. There are a lot of experiencers there, but because they live under a totalitarian dictatorship, the government will not give them assistance, will not allow them to gather. So that's extraordinarily difficult. But so there are Asian people, maybe at a lower level than Celtic people, Native American people, indigenous people, but they still exist. African people, African American people as well. You have a lot in Brazil, a lot in South America in general, and so it seems to be increased in that population, although we did not have a lot of non-English speaking people who took part in our studies. So that was a problem, simply because we didn't have the ability financially to have all of this translated into foreign languages.
And is possible, is there techniques to stop an abduction, to avoid an abduction, or stop, well, I'm on board, or I think I'm being abducted? Can I stop it?
Well, I wrote about several of these techniques in my book, but briefly, if you're being taken and it's because that these entities have gained access to your mind, they made eye contact with you, simply avoid eye contact. Keep your eyes closed and sing some kind of little ditty to yourself, the Mickey Mouse Club song, MICKEYMOUSE, Mickey Mouse, over and over again, or some other little song so that they can't gain access to your mind. There is a man in the United States who makes these helmets for experiencers, that they're thought blocking helmets, so that these entities can't gain access to human minds. Other things that experiencers have told me that worked for them was simply to ask for a reprieve, and they've received it for up to 5 years. There are others who have said to these non-humans, look, I don't want to remember what happened. It's interrupting my sleep. It's making me fearful. Just make me forget. And they don't remember being taken again. So there are a number of different things that you can do. I don't recommend violence toward these people. Something I do recommend is projecting love in their direction. You can keep your eyes closed and just fill your mind with love and project it. And it really does make a difference. It's much more responsive than having a fear reaction. It's extraordinarily important to lose that fight or flight response. I've been working on that with experiencers for quite a long time now. And it will move you to a new level of understanding where you can ask questions and these entities will project love toward you and answer your questions.
Oh, I hope never being abducted, because it's not something pleasure. It's not.
No, especially if you're filled with fear. If you're a victim and not a survivor, it's important to become a survivor.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, you have another book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers.
Yes.
Also with Stanton Freeman, which I met. Stanton, he came to Brazil several times, and I was with him 2 times, 3 times. He's an amazing person, amazing ufologist.
He was an amazing individual, a genius, a nuclear physicist. Yes. Yes, he graduated #1 in his high school class at age 16. And by the time he was like 21, I think it was, he had his master's degree from the University of Chicago, which is a very prestigious school, where he studied under the man who was behind the development of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so in this book, you bring very relevant information, among which the media has misinformed us about the UFO phenomena. Why? The media is side by side with the government, or they are a third part interested in the subject, or just mess it up?
Well, the mainstream media is supervised by the government, and you can lose your license if you go out against government policy. Now we have the internet, where you can pretty much say what you want, but the government is still taking action to be involved in that too, and to prevent the free exchange of information and ideas. In the United States, the government policy has changed somewhat. We stopped having these vocal disinformants destroy people's lives. For the most part, it started up a little bit again after the Intelligence Community Report was published on June 25th, 2021. And Travis Walton has recently been attacked, and I've been told that they're going to do Betty and Barney next, but I'm certainly not going to engage them in any kind of fight. They have a job to do, and so they're doing that job. That's the way I look at it. I'm not going to stop doing my important research to step back and involve myself in some kind of negative exchange to defend myself. Defense is a bad position to be in. You need to be on the offensive if you're going to be anything. But yeah, the government does control the flow of information, and they have allowed the information about the Tic Tac and other craft seen off both coasts of the United States to be shown on television shows. They've allowed the Skinwalker Ranch paranormal activity and UFO activity investigation to be shown on television here and cable networks. So there's more openness now. The Navy has even made the statement back in 2019 that the radar video of the Tic Tac and other UFOs belong to them. And of course, the military officers have come out and make statements about what they observed these craft doing, how they moved, that they can hover at 80,000 feet for hours on end. In a second, they can drop to 40,000 feet. In another second, to 50 feet above the ocean churn. And it's open information that there was a craft in the water, submerged, larger than an aircraft carrier, that it bounced back and forth over as if it were communicating. So they're opening it up some. They might slam the lid shut again. They've done that before. I hope not this time.
I hope not too. To finish our interview, what's your next steps of your research?
I'm writing a book now, and you know, it moved to a whole new level. It's more about what is happening right now, and insight into what is occurring, and where we're moving, what these ETs are telling people, the interdimensional part of this, and on and on. So a great deal of new information, and moving beyond fear. Also, ideas on how to do that and how important that is.
It is. You are correct. Well, Kathleen, thank you very much for your time. I will leave all the links for your website. You have a website. I'd leave
Yes.
on the description of the video. I will leave the links for your books because they are amazing, and I'm waiting the new one, your new book that you're writing. And thank you very much. You are so
Oh,
kind, and you have so knowledge, and you are so lucky to meet Hynek, Stanton Friedman, so many people
so
in
many.
ufology. And thank you very much, Kathleen.
And thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you today, Thiago.
Thank you very much.